what is contracting? All right. And I really tried to make this as simple as possible. So a traditional true contracting arrangement, the clinical client, the one that's coming for therapy or for the assessments, the clinical client pays the practice. And the money goes into the practice's bank account. The practice then pays the contractor, aka the clinician, an agreed upon amount. Now, in our traditional model, that would be a percentage amount. The clinical client here is the client of the practice. Why? Because the client is paying the practice to provide a clinical service. This is a customer to business relationship. So I've got some visuals down here as well, because it can get a bit confusing. So this is our client, clinical client, coming in, and this is our, we don't even have an FBOS machine in my practice anymore, but you get the gist of it. The image is representing the business with our little FBOS machine. The client pays the business. So that is a customer to business relationship. And therefore, the practice is invoicing the clinical client. We give them a receipt once they've paid, right? The practice, again, the second picture, the practice is the client of the contractor. Why? Because the practice is paying the contractor to provide a clinical service on behalf of the practice to its, that is the practice's clinical clients. So there is a business to business relationship between the practice, your business, and your independent contractor. And here, your contractor will be invoicing your business for the work that they've done. And I wonder, something that's really important that you might want to reflect on for yourself, does your contractor actually see your business as their client? And if they did, what dynamics would change in your working relationship if they actually realize that you are their business client? Very, very important, right? All those relationship dynamics when you're doing true contracting. Okay, so this is contracting. So in essence, you started your business, you've got a lot of clients, I can see all of them myself. I'm going to get a contractor in to come and do the work on my behalf. They're seeing clients of the business on my behalf. Therefore, they invoice me for the deliverables or the services provided. I pay them, Bob's your uncle. Okay, so the other arrangement that people often get confused with is what's called a services agreement. So people often confuse contracting with this one. And that's why I wanted to clearly delineate the differences between these. So with the services agreement, if we look at a services agreement in its purest form, the clinical client pays the clinician directly. Therefore, the money now goes into the clinician's bank account. You can see it's our client, they pay our clinician. All right, makes sense? The practice invoices the clinician for an agreed upon amount to provide services such as room space, admin, reception, or any other services as set out in the services agreement. So a services agreement is different to a room rental agreement. Let's just say that for a second. So room rental agreement is only you rent the room and that's it. Services agreement is you get the room, but you also get admin. There's somebody welcoming your clients. Maybe they're doing the billing generally, maybe even doing some marketing on your behalf. So we're doing all these services for you that is set out in the services agreement. So in this scenario, the clinical client is the client of the clinician, okay? Why? Because the client is paying the clinician to provide a clinical service. So there is now a customer to business relationship here. And the clinician invoices the clinical client. Therefore, the money goes into the the clinician's bank account. Here, in this scenario, the clinician is the client of the practice. So this relationship has now flipped around, okay? The clinician is the client of the practice because the clinician is paying the practice provide business services, whether that's room space, admin, reception, billing, etc. And therefore, there is a business-to-business relationship. And here, the practice invoices the clinician. Okay, so the relationship here has swapped around. Okay, I hope you're with me. Now, in true allied health small business owner style, and because this often gets done within the medical area, what has happened is that a lot of practices has taken this pure services agreement and made it complicated. Okay, and this is what the complicated version of this looks like. And it's generally practice owners that has this model, this one that I'm talking about, that confuses this model with proper or true contracting. So in this non-pure, complicated version of the services agreement, what happens? So more often here, the clinical client pays the practice and the money goes into the practice's bank account, almost like for holding in trust, you know, like lawyers would do for holding in trust. And here the billing is part of the service provided by the practice. So the practice owner goes, you know, you don't need to bring in your own FBOS machine. We'll just use this one at the front desk, or you don't need to have your own Stripe account. We'll just pull everything through our Power Diary or Helixy or whatever they're using, and we'll, you know, pay the money over to you. So the client pays the clinician, but via the business, okay? The practice then pays the clinician their agreed upon amount, and that is usually based on a percentage, and then retains the rest of that billables for the provision of services as set out in the services agreement. Okay, so here we go. Client pays the business on behalf of the clinician, and the business then pays out the clinician the billings that they have taken on their behalf. Okay, and then the clinician pays, but not really directly because the business retains it. But in essence, what they are doing, they are paying the business via the withholding, via the amount the business is withholding. So the question then is, the clinical client is the client of who? Who is the client in this scenario? So, well, who knows? Because we've now complicated it. I would think, you know, generally you need to look at the contract that has been written up. But if it's not stated in a contract as such, I think any reasonable person would assume that generally the client here, i.e. the clinical client, will be the client of the clinician, as the clinician is just now outsourced the taking of the payments to the practice as part of the service agreement. Therefore, this is a customer to business client relationship. And the practice invoices the clinical client, but they're doing it on behalf of the clinician because it's a services agreement and not contracting. So the clinician here is the client of the practice. Why? Because the clinician is paying the practice to provide these business services such as room rent, rental, space, admin, reception. And therefore, this is a business-to-business relationship again, okay? Always business-to-business. And here, the practice invoices the clinician, and the clinician pays the practice via the amount of money that is being withheld.